The man dressed as a police officer had a clear path to Ren Kurose, yet he turned away from him and reached for the homeless woman's backpack instead. Seconds earlier, Ren's security chief had dismissed that same woman as a nuisance who did not belong behind the hotel. By the time the first vehicle blocked the alley, she was the only person there who understood that the police had never come to save anyone. And when Ren finally listened to her, the question stopped being whether she was in danger and became why someone had expected to find her there. If you're listening from the United States, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. 14 minutes earlier, Imani Valet had been sitting beneath the rear awning of the Kurose Grand Hotel with a laptop balanced across her knees and a paper cup of convenience store coffee cooling beside her boot. She had learned the rhythms of the alley over 6 weeks. Delivery truck at 1:40. Kitchen staff smoking near the loading dock around 2. Cleaning crews changing shifts shortly before 3. The street lamp above her had been broken for most of that time. Someone had repaired it the previous afternoon. The new bulb was brighter than the others, washing the concrete beneath her in hard white light. Imani disliked it. She had chosen the corner because people rarely looked there. Tonight someone was making it difficult not to. "Pack your things." She looked up. Daichi Mori stood beyond the edge of the awning with 2 hotel security officers behind him. His dark coat was dry, despite the rain. His attention moved from the laptop to the backpack beside her. "I'm on public access pavement. You're beside a restricted service entrance. The restricted area begins at the yellow line." Mori glanced down. Her boots were several inches outside it. That isn't the point. It usually becomes the point when someone is trying to remove you from somewhere. Mori had seen her before. So had most of the night staff. A foreign student working on a laptop at impossible hours was not unusual near the university district. Sleeping near a luxury hotel was. He had tolerated her until tonight. Ren Kurose was scheduled to leave through the rear entrance instead of the lobby. Security had received warnings concerning possible surveillance around several Kurose properties. Mori was not interested in discovering whether the woman beside the loading entrance was merely broke mentally unstable. Working for a reporter or waiting for someone important, his responsibility was to reduce uncertainty before his employer appeared. Identification. Imani closed the laptop. For what legal purpose? Mori extended his hand. For the purpose of deciding whether you remain here. That isn't a legal purpose. One of the younger guards almost smiled. Mori did not. Passport. Imani studied him for a moment, then reached slowly into the inner pocket of her backpack and handed over her American passport and university identification. Mori photographed both. She watched him open an internal security application on his phone. "What are you doing?" "Creating an incident record. There wasn't an incident. There is now." He entered her name. Imani Vale, 29, international graduate student. She saw him attach a flag restricting access to Kurose-managed properties. "You understand that creates a time-stamped record?" "Right," Mori looked at her. "I understand exactly what it creates." "Good." Something in the way she said it made the younger guard stop smiling. Mori returned the documents and gestured toward the backpack. "We need to inspect that." "No." His expression hardened. "You are sitting outside a hotel used by senior Kurose executives during a security alert. And you've established that I am a law student with no criminal record. We established what your identification says." Imani zipped the backpack completely shut. "You are not searching it without consent or lawful authority." Mori was deciding whether to make the argument uglier when his earpiece clicked. Both guards straightened. A black sedan appeared at the mouth of the alley. Then another. The discussion ended instantly. "Move her." One guard stepped toward Imani. She stood before he touched her, slung the backpack over one shoulder, and moved toward the wall. The rear hotel doors opened. Ren Kurose walked out with 2 men beside him. Imani recognized him only because his photograph occasionally appeared in business publications at the university library. Executive Vice President of Kurose Maritime Holdings, shipping logistics, private security, real estate. The kind of man whose biography used the word inheritance without explaining exactly what had been inherited. He was taller than she expected, dressed simply in a charcoal overcoat, carrying nothing himself. Nobody around him wasted movement or conversation. Mori approached him. Route is clear. It remained clear for approximately 6 seconds. Blue emergency lights flashed at the far end of the alley. A white and black vehicle turned in sharply, stopping across the exit behind Ren's sedans. 2 uniformed men emerged. Police 1 called in Japanese. Security incident on the adjoining street. Kurose Ren must come with us immediately. Mori moved forward. Imani stared at the vehicle. Something was wrong. The first officer repeated the instruction. Transfer him now. Emergency protective custody. Mori's hand went toward his earpiece. Imani spoke. Don't. Nobody responded. She stepped away from the wall. They aren't police. One of Ren's guards turned toward her. Mori did not even look back. Stay where you are. The vehicle code is wrong. That got Ren's attention. He stopped walking. Imani pointed toward the rear markings. That designation doesn't belong to this jurisdiction. The officer nearest the vehicle changed his stance. Mori finally looked at her. You don't know what you're talking about? I spent 3 months reviewing emergency detention procedure. Police don't request transfer like that anymore? The wording was revised. The second supposed officer moved toward them. Now. Imani looked directly at Ren. If you get into that vehicle, nobody here knows where you're going. Ren's eyes moved from her to the men in uniform. Then to Mori. Verify them. Sir, we need to move. Verify them. Mori reached for his phone. The first officer reacted before the call connected. His hand disappeared beneath his jacket. Ren's security team moved at once. The alley broke apart into shouting bodies shifting behind vehicles, doors opening one sedan, reversing hard enough to strike a stack of plastic crates. Imani dropped behind a concrete loading barrier. A man rushed past Ren, not toward him, toward her. She saw his eyes fix on the backpack. He grabbed the strap. Imani twisted away and drove the edge of her laptop case into his wrist. He lost his grip long enough for one of Ren's guards to intercept him. Inside, Mori shouted. Ren was already being moved toward the hotel doors. Imani followed until she saw 2 men entering through the service passage. Not there. Mori spun toward her. What, they can cut you off at the kitchen corridor? How would you know? Because I've been using these buildings longer than you've been noticing me. She pointed toward a narrow maintenance door beside the loading bay. That connects to the parking structure next door. Mori hesitated. Ren did not. Take it. Imani led them through a concrete utility passage she had discovered weeks earlier while looking for an indoor route between a 24-hour bathhouse and the cafe where she studied before dawn. 7 minutes later, Ren Kurose was inside a different vehicle 3 blocks away. No one called Imani homeless again. At the secure apartment, Mori stood near the door while another man checked the hallway outside. Ren placed Imani's backpack on the table himself. You saved me from getting into that car. I stopped you from making a bad decision. A faint trace of amusement crossed his face. You make a distinction. I'm studying law. Distinctions are expensive. His gaze settled on the backpack. So why did one of them ignore me to take that Imani said nothing? For weeks she had believed the worst thing that had happened to her was losing her housing after a financial freeze she could not control. Now professional attackers had known where Ren Kurose would be, had arrived with convincing uniforms and procedural language, and one of them had abandoned the most valuable man in the alley for the contents of a broke student's bag. Imani rested one hand over the closed laptop inside it. For the first time that night, she was no longer wondering why she had been caught in Ren Kurose's problem. She was wondering whether Ren Kurose had been used to get close to hers. Ren did not ask what was inside Imani's backpack again that night. That restraint bought him more than another question would have. By morning, the apartment had become a temporary command post. 2 Kurose security officers rotated outside the door. Mori worked from a dining table covered with printed route maps, hotel access logs, and screenshots from street cameras. Ren stood near the kitchen counter, reading a report on the false police vehicle. Imani had slept for less than 2 hours. When she came out of the guest room, her backpack was exactly where she had left it, closed, untouched. Ren noticed her checking the zipper. I gave an instruction. To whom? Everyone. She looked toward Mori. He did not appear pleased about it. No one searches her property, Ren said. No one copies her devices. No one questions her without her consent. Imani looked back at him. That sounds expensive. It already is. He handed her a printed page. The fake officers had used a transfer authorization bearing authentic formatting, correct departmental references, and language close enough to a legitimate emergency order that Mori's men had lost several critical seconds trying to verify it. Imani read the first paragraph twice. This wording is obsolete. We know. No. You know it's wrong now. Whoever drafted this knew it used to be right. Ren placed another document beside it. 3 years ago, closer to 4. How sure are you enough to tell you they had legal help? Mori finally spoke, or someone copied an old form. They didn't copy it. She pointed at a sentence in the middle. This phrase was removed after a jurisdictional dispute because it implied compulsory transfer authority that local police didn't actually have. Someone altered the rest of the document and kept the phrase because they understood what your security team expected to see. Ren pulled out a chair. Sit. Imani stayed standing. He looked at the paperwork instead. Fine. She almost smiled. Mori did not. Ren slid 3 more documents across the table. These are internal protocols. Sanitized. Imani read them. One dealt with emergency transport, another with communication between private security and prefectural authorities. The third described response procedures for senior Kurose executives. She looked up. You want me to tell you which part they exploited? I want you to tell me what I'm missing. That was the first time he had asked for her judgment rather than her explanation. She took the chair. 30 minutes later, Imani had circled 2 clauses and written a date in the margin. The false order didn't just imitate government procedure, she said. It was built around your own verification process. Mori leaned closer. They knew which questions we would ask. Yes. Ren folded his arms. So someone knew police procedure and Kurose protocol, or had access to people who did. That answer solved one problem and created another. The ambush had not been built entirely from outside. Ren left the apartment shortly after noon. Imani objected when she realized he intended to continue working from Kurose headquarters. You were nearly taken 12 hours ago, and if I disappear, whoever arranged it learns that it worked. That's pride. That's governance. She watched him put on his coat. Those aren't always different. No. The answer surprised her more than an argument would have. He left Mori behind. That surprised her, too. By afternoon, Imani was given access to a small set of corporate filings and incident reports. Nothing operational, nothing involving criminal activity. At least not openly. She was halfway through a logistics subsidiary's compliance history when she found the same trust name on 3 unrelated disclosures. Kansei Development Foundation, she said. Mori looked up. What? Why is a charitable foundation appearing in a maritime insurance file? It shouldn't matter. That wasn't my question. He walked over reluctantly. Imani traced the references through affiliated entities, then stopped. The foundation was familiar. Too familiar. She searched her university email. The housing suspension notice was still there. Funding temporarily unavailable due to external compliance review. She opened the attachment. Then the next. Then the original scholarship award letter. Kansei Development Foundation. Her face changed enough that Mori noticed. What is it? Who froze these accounts? He said nothing. Imani stood. Who authorized the compliance hold? Mori's hesitation answered before he did. Ren returned an hour later. Imani was waiting at the dining table with the foundation documents arranged in front of her. He saw his own name before she said anything. You signed it. Ren read the authorization. Yes, you froze the foundation paying for my housing. It was connected to suspicious transfers, so you froze everything. We suspended distributions pending review. I lost my apartment. He looked at her. I didn't know. I know. That made the exchange worse, not better. Ren pulled out the chair opposite her. The foundation was one of 9 entities moving funds through a company under investigation. We couldn't determine which payments were legitimate, so you stopped all of them. Yes, and people you never saw absorbed the cost. Yes, no excuse, no speech about necessity, just the answer. Imani folded the letter. I spent 6 weeks explaining to the university that I wasn't trying to disappear. I can restore the housing tonight. No, I can. That's the problem. Ren waited. If your company caused the damage through a compliance process, then the correction goes through the same process. You don't get to turn institutional harm into a personal favor because I happen to save you. Mori watched Ren carefully. Ren took out his phone. Imani expected him to make a call. Instead, he placed it face down. What do you want? A written review of the frozen grants, independent from anyone who reports directly to you. That will take longer. Yes, you could be housed tonight. And then I owe you something no document can define. Ren considered that. Fine. Mori turned toward him. Sir, do it her way. The decision had a consequence before evening. Ren's legal counsel objected to reopening the compliance review while an internal security crisis was active. One board member demanded to know why an individual scholarship recipient had suddenly become important enough to trigger procedural changes. Ren's answer was brief, because the procedure failed. By dinner, someone inside Kurose headquarters had already asked who Imani Vale was. The question reached an older man named Shingo Kurose, Ren's uncle, chief financial architect of the corporate group. When Shingo called, Ren put the conversation on speaker, only after asking Imani, You have the student there? Shingo asked. Yes, the one from the alley. Yes. A pause. She should remain in a controlled residence until this is resolved. Imani looked at Ren. Shingo continued. If the attackers were interested in her moving, her creates unnecessary exposure. Ren glanced at Imani. She decides whether she stays. Another pause. Longer this time? Of course, Shingo said. Before ending the call, he asked one more question. Did they take her computer? No. Good. The call ended. Imani stared at the phone. Ren noticed. What, nothing yet? He did not press. Later that night, while comparing the false emergency order against older regulatory cases, Ren stopped behind her chair. A sentence in her notes had caught his attention. Not the conclusion, the structure. He took one of the printed pages from the table. Write that again. Imani turned. What this argument? She looked down at the sentence. A narrow interpretation of lawful access does not cure an unlawful chain of control. Ren walked to a locked cabinet and removed a thin file. Inside were printed reports from an anonymous legal analysis account that had circulated through Tokyo compliance offices for nearly 2 years. Grey Lantern. The name appeared on the cover. Ren opened one report and placed it beside her notes. The phrasing was almost identical. Mori stopped moving. Imani closed her laptop. Ren looked at her backpack, then at her. You're Grey Lantern. She could have lied. Instead, she said, Yes. Mori stood immediately. Ren lifted one hand. Sit down. Mori did not. That account has targeted Kurose-linked companies for 18 months. Some deserved it, Imani said. Some? Would you prefer? I say all. Ren almost laughed, but the moment was too serious. He looked at the file again. The anonymous analyst his lawyers had tried unsuccessfully to identify was sitting at his dining table wearing borrowed clothes because one of his own compliance orders had left her without housing. Imani waited for the lock to turn against her. Ren reached into his pocket instead. He placed the apartment access card on the table between them. "If you want to leave, leave." Mori stared at him. Imani did not touch the card. "And if I stay, then you help me understand why someone built an ambush around an obsolete legal procedure." She studied him for several seconds. Then she picked up the card. Not to leave. To keep it. Ren returned the Grey Lantern report to the table. Imani opened the corporate restructuring file beside it. A clause buried deep inside the governance section caught her attention. She read it once, then again. What Ren moved beside her. She pointed to the paragraph. "If the acting head is judged unable to preserve organizational continuity, emergency voting control transfers to designated trustees." Yes. Who drafted this? Ren looked at the signature line. The answer was already there. Shingo Kurose. Imani leaned back. Someone inside Ren's world had built the false procedure used against him. And years earlier, someone had also built a perfectly legal procedure for removing him if he ever changed that world too much. The clause did not remove Ren Kurose because he had committed a crime. It could remove him because enough powerful people decided he was failing to preserve what his family had built. Imani read the language a third time. Organizational continuity, she said. That phrase can mean almost anything. Ren remained beside her. It was meant to. By your uncle, by everyone who was afraid the transition would move too fast. The document dated back 6 years to the period when Kurose businesses began separating legitimate corporate operations from the association's older criminal structure. Imani turned another page. There were shipping companies, warehouse trusts, pension funds, property holdings, insurance vehicles, security subsidiaries, all tied together through ownership arrangements dense enough to make legality and control look like different questions. You keep calling this a restructuring, she said. It is. It looks like a controlled divorce where both sides kept the same bank accounts. That's why it's taking years. She looked at him. Or why someone designed it, never to finish. Ren did not answer immediately. He took the file and opened a supplemental agreement. These companies employ people who have never had anything to do with the association. Dock workers, drivers, accountants, contractors. Their pensions sit inside funds that were built with money I can't honestly call clean. So you keep the structure alive to protect them. I separate what can survive. And if it can't, then I decide who takes the loss. The sentence was spoken without self-pity. That made Imani understand something she had missed. Ren's hesitation was not fear of losing his title. It was fear of discovering that there was no clean way to dismantle inherited power without crushing people who had never chosen to participate in it. That did not make the system less corrupt. It made his decisions more difficult to judge from the outside. Imani closed the file. I have enough to publish something on Shingo now. Ren looked at her. Enough for what? To force regulatory attention onto the emergency trusts. And what happens when the market reacts before investigators understand which subsidiaries are exposed? You tell me. He did. A port refinancing could fail. 2 insurers could suspend coverage. A pension trustee might freeze distributions while determining whether the underlying assets were subject to seizure. 3,000 legitimate employees could wake up attached to a scandal they had never heard of. Imani listened without interrupting. When he finished, she opened her laptop. Ren expected her to begin writing. Instead, she moved the draft Grey Lantern report into an encrypted archive. I'm holding it. Mori, standing near the window, turned. You have evidence against Shingo Kurose and you're not publishing it? I have evidence of a structure, not enough proof of intent. That has never stopped reporters. I'm not a reporter. She looked at Ren. If I release this now, I hurt him. I also hand collateral damage to everyone who wants to call that damage necessary. Ren studied her for several seconds. What changed? Nothing. That isn't true. I still think your family built a system that hides responsibility inside complexity. And innocent people don't become acceptable losses because exposing you feels satisfying. That was the closest thing to loyalty she had offered him. It was also something more dangerous. Restraint could now be interpreted as protection. By morning, someone else was already doing exactly that. Imani's university sent her a formal notice requesting clarification regarding her access to confidential Kurose records. The wording was careful, but the implication was obvious. An anonymous complaint alleged that Grey Lantern had received privileged corporate information while conducting supposedly independent research. How did they connect me to Grey Lantern? She asked. They haven't officially, Ren said. Someone has. Mori checked his phone. The complaint references your presence here. Imani looked toward Ren. There are cameras downstairs. There are cameras everywhere. That's not an answer. No, it's a problem. Ren called Kurose legal counsel. Within 2 hours, the university received a signed declaration stating that Imani had been given limited access to specified records after the attempted extraction in the alley, and that she had not obtained them through deception theft or unauthorized entry. The immediate ethics threat weakened. The cost arrived almost as quickly. At Kurose headquarters, 3 senior directors requested an emergency review of Ren's decision to provide corporate information to an outside researcher known for investigating Kurose-linked entities. By lunch, one trustee had used a phrase from the old clause, compromise judgment. Imani read the internal summary Ren brought back that evening. You defended me. I stated facts. You used your position to make them care about those facts. Yes, and now they're using that as evidence against you. Yes. She pushed the document back. You should have let me handle the university. You didn't have the records they asked for. You could have given them to me. They would still ask who authorized them. I could have answered, and they would still arrive at my name. That's different from putting your signature underneath mine. Ren removed his coat and placed it over a chair. You wanted institutional correction instead of private favors. This isn't the same thing. It is exactly the same principle. No. This is you deciding that because you can absorb the damage you should, and this is you pretending refusing help makes the consequences more ethical. The argument stopped there. Neither had won it, but something between them had changed. Imani no longer doubted that Ren would spend political capital to protect her credibility. Ren no longer doubted she would refuse an easy attack on Shingo if it endangered people who had nothing to do with him. Trust had become measurable, which meant someone else could measure it too. That evening, Imani returned to the original incident record Mori had created in the alley. She was looking for the exact time her passport had been uploaded. So, 17. The false police vehicle entered at 02:23. She compared that with the internal directive instructing security teams to catalog unusual foreign surveillance near Kurose properties. The directive was older than she expected. Issued 11 days before the ambush. Authorized through Shingo's compliance office. Imani scrolled further. Why was my nationality relevant? Mori looked over. It wasn't specifically. The directive highlights foreign graduate researchers, journalists, and contract workers. Counter-surveillance categories. Why graduate researchers? Mori had no answer. Ren stepped closer. Imani saved a certified copy of the directive beside Mori's incident report. Then she opened the hotel maintenance records. The rear street lamp had been repaired the day before the ambush. Other broken lights on the same block had remained untouched. She stared at that for a moment. Not proof. Not yet. But the pattern was beginning to feel less accidental. Her phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number contained a single photograph. Imani entering Ren's apartment building 3 nights earlier. Another followed. Ren beside her in the lobby. Then a link. A financial news site had published a short piece questioning whether the anonymous investigator Grey Lantern had been secretly cooperating with factions inside Kurose Maritime. Her name was not yet printed, but the article mentioned a foreign law student. Ren read it over her shoulder. They're building a story. Imani opened a second notification. This one came from her university. Her preliminary ethics review had been escalated. Mori's phone rang almost immediately. He answered, listened, then handed it to Ren. The Kurose board had invoked the emergency governance mechanism. A formal vote would determine whether Ren remained fit to preserve organizational continuity. The structure Shingo had drafted years ago was now moving against him. Imani looked from the article to the directive, then back to Mori's time-stamped report. The people attacking them no longer needed to touch either of them. Their cooperation was enough. Everything they had done to protect the other could now be presented as proof that they had been working together from the beginning. Then, Imani noticed the date on the Foreign Researcher Directive again. 11 days before the alley. Long before Ren knew her name. She turned the screen toward him. They were looking for someone like me before you ever met me. Ren read it. Imani opened the photograph from the alley incident and enlarged the frame where the false officer had abandoned Ren and reached for her backpack. For the first time, the possibility became difficult to ignore. Maybe their growing closeness had not created the original danger. But now it had given whoever planned that night the perfect way to hide what the operation had really been for. By 9 the next morning, Imani's name was public. The article did not call her a criminal. It did something more useful to Shingo Kurose. It asked questions. Why had Grey Lantern, an anonymous investigator who had exposed Kurose-linked companies, been living inside a residence controlled by Ren Kurose? Why had Ren personally intervened in her university ethics review? Why had she delayed publishing information about the emergency trusts now being used against him? Nothing in the article needed to be false. It only needed to arrange the truth in the most damaging order. Across Yokohama, Kurose directors were assembling for the emergency vote. Imani's university suspended her access to research systems pending review. 2 journalists waited outside the building. Ren read the article once. Shingo wants me to deny everything. Of course he does. If I deny working with you, I destroy your credibility. If you defend me, you strengthen his case against you. Ren put the phone down. That's the structure. Imani was already opening the files she had preserved from the previous night. No, that's the story. He wants us trapped inside. She placed 3 timestamps on the screen. The Foreign Researcher Surveillance Directive. Mori's incident entry. The ambush. Ren looked at them. Imani added the maintenance order for the street lamp. Who requested this repair? Mori accessed the hotel system. Facilities received a priority instruction. From whom he traced the authorization. The request had passed through a security contractor controlled by a Kurose holding company under Shingo's compliance division. Mori stopped scrolling. Ren said nothing. Imani opened the surveillance directive again. 11 days before the ambush, Kurose Properties had been instructed to identify foreign graduate researchers, journalists, and contractors lingering near sensitive locations. Not suspected criminals, not known threats, people whose professions involved finding information. Shingo wasn't worried about surveillance, generally, Imani said. He was narrowing a search. For Grey Lantern, Mori said. Maybe. Ren looked at the photograph from the alley. The man who went for your bag. Imani enlarged it. He had a route to you. He ignored it, and your uncle asked whether they took my computer. Mori turned toward Ren. The question Shingo had asked over the speakerphone now sounded different. At the time, it had seemed like concern about evidence. Now it sounded like inventory. Imani pulled up the logs from Ren's departure that night. The route change sending him through the rear alley had been authorized less than an hour before his convoy moved. The request originated from a security risk assessment attached to Shingo's office. Ren read the line twice. That route put me beside you. Yes. The conclusion no longer required imagination. Shingo had not known Grey Lantern was Imani Vale. He had suspected that Grey Lantern was one of several foreign researchers operating around Yokohama. He needed a reason for Kurose security to identify them without openly revealing what he was searching for. Ren's movement created that reason. The fake emergency created pressure. Mori's security team did the identification for him, and when one woman proved unusually important, the chaos was supposed to push her into Kurose custody. The attempted extraction of Ren Kurose had been camouflage. Ren had been bait. Imani had been the objective. Mori sat down slowly. I put your passport into the system. Yes, I gave him your name. Imani looked at the timestamp. You also proved exactly when he got it. That was the first useful thing anyone had said about Mori's mistake. Ren walked to the window. For 3 days he had assumed Shingo wanted him weakened because of the reforms. That was true, but incomplete. Shingo had recognized another threat before Ren did. Grey Lantern possessed years of research into the legal machinery that allowed criminal wealth to survive inside legitimate institutions. Shingo had tried to bring her inside a system he controlled. Instead, he had placed her beside the one man capable of dismantling it. Ren turned back. What do you need? Nothing from you. That's not an answer. It's exactly what I need. Imani began separating her records into 2 groups. Everything obtained before the alley went on the left. Everything Ren had provided afterward went on the right. My defense cannot depend on your testimony. Ren understood immediately. If he vouched for her, Shingo would call it collaboration. If Imani could prove Grey Lantern's investigation existed independently before their meeting, the narrative changed. She opened university archive timestamps, public court filings, old regulatory submissions, publication metadata, and encrypted drafts created months before she knew Ren personally. Mori's incident record became the bridge. It proved Kurose security had identified Imani before any alleged partnership could have begun. The surveillance directive pushed the date further back. The maintenance order tied that search to the alley. By early afternoon, Imani had built a chronology that did not ask anyone to believe her. It asked them to read the dates. Ren, meanwhile, faced a problem dates could not solve. The board meeting began without him physically present. Directors appeared across secure screens. Shingo sat at the center of the main conference room. His argument was measured. Ren had exposed Kurose businesses to an outside investigator. He had interfered in a matter involving her academic standing. He had allowed personal judgment to compromise organizational continuity. The emergency trusts should therefore transfer voting control before regulators, creditors, and markets reacted. Shingo never mentioned the alley. He did not need to. Imani watched from outside the camera frame. You can expose him, Ren said quietly. It won't stop the trusts. No, he can lose the argument and still take the companies. Yes. Ren opened the original restructuring agreement. The dissolution provision had remained unused because every Kurose leader before him understood what activating it meant. The association's controlling interests in major legitimate subsidiaries would be transferred to independent trustees, pending regulatory review. The emergency trusts would have nothing left to seize. Neither would Ren. Imani read the provision once. If you do this, you don't get control back automatically. I know. You may never get it back. I know. Then don't make the decision because they're using me against you. Ren looked at her. I'm making it because he proved the system cannot survive reform without turning reform into grounds for removal. That was the answer she needed. Not protection. Choice. Imani sent her chronology simultaneously to her University Council independent regulators, already examining Kurose-linked entities and the legal representatives overseeing the emergency board process. She did not publish accusations. She published sequence. At the same time, Ren entered the board meeting. Shingo was speaking when Ren interrupted. I accept that organizational continuity is compromised. Several directors looked relieved. Shingo did not. He knew Ren too well. Ren placed the dissolution authorization on the table. So I'm ending the organization's control over the companies you're trying to preserve. For the first time, Shingo lost the advantage of preparation. The emergency trusts depended on a Kurose controlling block. Ren was surrendering that block voluntarily. Shingo could remove him from power. He could not inherit power Ren had already given away. Within an hour, independent trustees were notified. Regulators received access requests. The succession vote became irrelevant. Then Imani's chronology reached the board. The repaired street lamp, the foreign researcher directive, Mori's database entry, the route change, the operative reaching for her backpack, Shingo's question about her computer. Separate details became one design. He had searched for Grey Lantern before Ren ever knew Imani existed. By evening, Shingo's allies were refusing his calls, not because they had become moral, because his structure could no longer protect them. Ren stood alone in the apartment after the final authorization cleared. His phone kept vibrating with resignations, accusations, legal notices, and messages from men who had served his family for decades. He turned it off. Imani closed her laptop. We stopped him. Ren looked around the residence as if seeing it, without the organization attached to it. No. He placed the Kurose access card beside her hand. We stopped the thing that made men like him possible. Outside reporters were already gathering. Inside, there was nothing left to solve that night. Shingo's power had been broken. Imani's name could never become anonymous again, and Ren Kurose had protected her credibility by destroying the empire that once made his protection matter. For the first time since they met, neither of them had anything left to hide behind. What remained between them would have to survive without power deciding the answer. 3 weeks after Ren signed away the Kurose Association's control of its legitimate companies, the apartment no longer felt like a safe house. Half the security staff were gone. The coded elevator access had been disabled. The men who once rotated outside Imani's door had been reassigned, resigned, or stopped answering Ren's calls. Independent trustees controlled the major subsidiaries now, and the Kurose name no longer guaranteed obedience inside buildings that had carried it for decades. Ren kept the apartment because he still owned the lease. That was about all the authority it represented. Shingo Kurose was not dead missing or dramatically ruined. He was under formal investigation for conspiracy market manipulation, unlawful surveillance, and interference with corporate governance. Prosecutors had frozen several personal accounts, while regulators traced the trust structures he had built. His greater loss was quieter. The machinery that made him important no longer belonged to him. Without the emergency trusts, without the Kurose controlling block, and without executives willing to risk themselves for a structure, regulators were now dismantling. Shingo had become what he had always feared becoming. A man with knowledge, but no mechanism to enforce it. Imani learned that from a newspaper article she read at the university library. She had been allowed back in 2 days earlier. Her ethics review concluded that Grey Lantern's research clearly predated her relationship with Ren, and that the restricted Kurose materials she later examined had been voluntarily disclosed and properly documented. The ruling cleared her. It did not restore what anonymity had protected. 3 law firms withdrew interviews without explanation. One professor who had once praised Grey Lantern's work advised Imani to consider a less politically exposed career path. Another institution offered her a fellowship, then added a condition requiring pre-publication review of anything involving organized crime. She declined. Being proven honest had not made her uncomplicated. That afternoon, the university housing office sent confirmation that her accommodation had finally been restored through the scholarship program. Not through Ren, not through Kurose. The independent review he had authorized had separated legitimate scholarship distributions from the suspicious financial activity that triggered the original freeze. Imani read the approval twice before closing the email. 6 weeks sleeping behind a hotel had ended because the process that failed her had finally been forced to correct itself. Ren had kept his word. He had not touched it. When she returned to the apartment that evening, Mori was waiting near the entrance. No earpiece, no security team. Just a dark suit and an envelope. What is that confirmation that your identification has been removed from every remaining Kurose security watch list? Imani took it. You came here personally for that? Mori looked uncomfortable. I also wanted to tell you that the original incident record is being preserved by investigators. The one where you classified me as a security nuisance. Yes? Good. He almost smiled. I assumed you'd say that. The record had become part of the case against Shingo because its timestamp proved Imani had been identified by Kurose security before the public story of collaboration with Ren could possibly have been true. The act intended to reduce her to a suspicious stranger had become one of the cleanest pieces of evidence defending her independence. Mori nodded once and left. Ren came home an hour later, carrying a cardboard box. Imani looked at it. That's dramatic. It contains 6 years of personal files and 1 coffee machine, so the empire fits in a box. Now, the coffee machine was expensive. She laughed before she could stop herself. Ren set the box on the counter. He had lost more than buildings. Several senior association members had severed contact with him. Some called him a traitor. Others blamed him for pension uncertainty, regulatory seizures, and the collapse of arrangements they had spent their lives treating as permanent. He had retained personal assets outside the dissolved corporate structure, but the distinction hardly mattered to people who had once measured him by how many doors opened when he arrived. Those doors belonged to trustees now. I'm leaving Yokohama, he said. Imani stopped opening the envelope. When next week? For how long, I don't know. She watched him remove his watch and place it beside the coffee machine. He had rehearsed this. That irritated her more than the decision. Why? Because every story about you still mentions me. That's not new. It will keep costing you. So this is another protection plan. No security detail. Just geographic disappearance. It may be more useful. Imani crossed her arms. You destroyed your own control structure because you understood that protecting something by controlling it can become another form of ownership. I remember, and now you're deciding alone that the best thing for my life is removing yourself from it. Ren looked at her. When you say it that way, it sounds exactly like what it is. He sat down. For once, there was no organization behind the decision. No board, no guards. No underworld hierarchy available to make his judgment final. That was why Imani could refuse him without consequence. She placed a letter on the table. The logo belonged to the Yokohama Institute for Public Accountability. I accepted this yesterday. Ren read the first page. The position was less prestigious than the corporate track she had once planned. It paid less. It also gave her authority to investigate complex relationships between public institutions, private companies, and illicit finance under her own name. You're staying. Yes. You could leave Japan? I could. You could rebuild somewhere. My name doesn't follow you. I could do that too. Then why stay? Because I'm tired of organizing my life around what powerful men might do with my name. Ren put the letter down. Imani continued. If you leave because you want another life, leave. If you leave because you think disappearing is something you're doing for me, don't. He looked at the access card, still lying near the edge of the table. The same one he had given her after learning she was Grey Lantern. What would staying look like? No guards following me. Agreed. No private payments. Agreed. No secret apartments chosen because someone decided I'm safer there. He glanced around. That one may be difficult to argue with. And no rebuilding some smaller version of the Kurose Association around us, because being ordinary makes you uncomfortable. Ren was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. And you, what about me? You don't get to treat refusing help as proof of independence forever. That landed harder than she expected. If something affects both of us, he said, I get a voice. Not control. A voice. Imani considered it. Agreed. There was no confession. No promise that the damage behind them had somehow made them pure. They simply sat across from each other and negotiated what remaining together would require. For both of them. Months later, Imani left the Yokohama courthouse carrying a copy of the final independent report on the Kurose restructuring. Across the street, Ren waited beneath an umbrella. No convoy waited behind him. No men watched the corners. The alley near the old hotel had been renovated, and the street lamp above the place where Imani once studied through the night was still burning. Shingo had ordered that light repaired because he wanted someone found. Instead, it marked the place where a man surrounded by power finally noticed someone his system had classified as irrelevant. Ren lifted the umbrella slightly when Imani approached. He did not cross for her. He waited. She chose the distance herself. Trust began where protection stopped deciding for the person it claimed to save. Subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what you think really changed them.